Welcome to the fifth hearing of the Committee's inquiry into the integrity, efficacy and value for money of the local small commitments allocation process. I acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of the lands on which we're meeting today, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. Celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of New South Wales. I also acknowledge and pay my respects to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us or watching today. My name is Abigail Boyd and I am chair of this committee. I ask everyone in the room to please turn their mobile phones to silent. Parliamentary privilege applies to witnesses in relation to the evidence they give today. However, it does not apply to what witnesses say outside of the hearing. I urge witnesses to be careful about making comments to the media or to others after completing their evidence. In addition, the Legislative Council has adopted rules to provide procedural fairness for inquiry participants. I encourage committee members and witnesses to be mindful of these procedures. So we now welcome our first witness. Thank you very much for making time to give evidence again. If I could get you to state your name and position title, but note that you don't need to swear an oath or affirmation, as you've already done so during this inquiry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Alison Morgan, Executive Director, the Grant Program Office in the Premier's Department. Thank you. And I have been previously sworn in.
Excellent. Thank you. There is an opportunity for you to make a short opening statement should you wish.
I think you've heard more than enough from me over the last few hearings.
Excellent. Thank you. I will begin with questions from the opposition. Mr. Rath.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms Morgan, for appearing today. On the 14th of June 2023, you emailed Anne Lewis a spreadsheet, which you described in that email as, quote, the original list that I received last week for the local small commitment allocation. We've got the documents we'll provide to you now as well. The spreadsheet contains election commitments against all 93 electorates, totalling $400,000 per electorate. Each project has the name of a Labor organiser to whom approval was notified and the date on which approval was notified, with dates ranging from 10 February 2023 and 24 March 2023. All of them were prior to the 23 election.
Thank you.
But then the second document, which the committee staff will give to you as well, is the list as of 28 July 2023, which, according to previous testimony, you received this list from Cherie Burden. And Cherie Burden told you that it was an authentic list of election commitments. You referred to this document as the source of truth document. Why didn't you provide the original list document when first ordered by the House under SO 52?
Well, we provided the list that was the final list, the list that we worked on. I received a document from Paul Mills in the Premier's office on the 14th of February, which was called the first batch of confirmed projects.
14th of June.
Sorry, I beg your pardon?
Yeah.
No, 14th of July. 14th of July. I received a document then. I don't know.
The
14th of July, I received a list called the first batch.
right.
21st of July, I received a similar email from, and these have been provided. I received a similar email from Paul Mills telling me it was the second batch. And then I received a list on the 28th telling me that it was the final batch,
Also
confirmed
from Paul
commitments,
Mills?
also from Paul Mills.
But what about the 14th of June 2023 list? What you've said this is the first batch of documents. So
The front page has
the front page, it says 14th of June, and you've referred to it as, here is the original list that I received last week for the local small commitment allocation.
I would have to go back and confirm that with my records. I don't recall receiving a list earlier to the ones in July. There was a lot of discussion around the fact that the Premier's office was pulling together the list across all of the electorates. But in my system, the records I have were the ones that came in July. And then when we had a confirmed final list, that's the one that we worked from.
Okay, so the second list, the 28th of July list, what you call the source of truth, we received that in an early SO 52 from which we received, I think, in January this year. This more recent list, the 14th of June 2023, it took us 3 calls for papers before we ended up getting that. And this list, which you have described as the original list, has all of the election commitments listed in there, which were made prior to the March 2023 election. And what we're trying to figure out is why this list was suppressed or not given to us until our third call for papers. Do you have any knowledge or recollection?
Well, the list that we have worked from was the list that was confirmed for us as being the confirmed and final list, which is the one that I received on the 28th of July. So when we were providing all the papers around the way we had operated and worked for the grant program, that was the list that we provided. It's the only list that we've worked from.
You started doing some work on this 14th of June list too. You said Joe Mason is doing some analysis on it now, so we will have an updated version we can sort and manage a little better soon. Can you please start investigating the questions of electorates where projects have not been identified and how many LGAs are encompassed in the electorate? Cheers, AJM.
Okay. Well, we certainly had started doing work on that on the first batch of lists that we'd received, because we were told it would take quite some weeks to pull together the complete list. So as they came through to us in a rolling basis around projects, we started looking at them to identify what kinds of organisations were they, what kinds of projects were they, in order to help us identify how we would put the guidelines together and the program would be run.
But so just on that, this 14th of June list, which I know you say you have to check your records, but with respect, this has come from the call for papers.
Sure.
It's your email. It says very clearly the date is there. That list is fully complete. Every electorate's on there. So and when you say you've started work on that, I don't understand how you had to wait for other batches to come in. That is a full list of every electorate, all dated before the March election in 2023. Why was this not provided until the third call for papers? Why was it hidden? Why wasn't it given to the committee at the very beginning?
Well, I certainly don't recall having anything that early in June. So I would have to go back and check my records around that. I don't know whether that...
it's here.
I'm not sure that the attachment that's with it is the correct one. It has an A number. The very early versions of lists we had were not entered into the objective system because they were incomplete and unready. I would have to take that on notice and go back and check.
But I mean, this is a document that came from a call for papers, so how could it be inaccurate?
I would have to check that. It doesn't tally with the records that I have about the advice I was given from the Premier's office.
So did anyone in the Premier's office or the Minister's office direct you not to provide this 14th of June
not.
list?
Definitely
Because it
not.
seems strange that it would take 3 calls of papers. I mean, I've got the original motion that the House passed, which basically called for all papers as part of the LSCA program. And it took us some time before we managed to get what is called the original list. And the reality is that there's discrepancies between the original list and the source of truth list, which is the line of questioning that we're going to have to go down. So it would be very helpful to know.
Well, I certainly have a first version from the 14th of July called the first batch. I have a second version from the 21st of July called the second batch. And then we have what was the confirmed and final batch on the 28th of July. I have no personal recollection, and I would have to go back and check to see where this has come from in the system. But I don't understand how this could be. I'll take your word, it's a full list. I've not done a reconciliation of it. When the batches I received on the 14th of July and the 21st of July were incomplete.
Was any work done?
Sorry, Chair,
Yeah.
just by way of clarification, is this June list you're talking about in these documents?
Yes,
It's
so
this one.
the cover page of one of the
Right.
batches has 14th of June 2023
It's the email
as the email attachment,
yeah,
and
right,
then the spreadsheet is attached to that. Was any work done to compare the earlier versions, so either the 14th of June or 14 July, 21 July, any of these different versions with the final source of truth document?
No.
So how do you know that it wasn't doctored along the way? So you've got various versions that were given to you
I didn't need
by
to
Paul
check
Mills.
that it had been doctored. I had no reason to consider it would be doctored, and what we were waiting for was the confirmation from the Premier's office that this was the final list, the approved list of all election commitments that had been made prior to the election.
So
It was
if
not
you-
up to me to check whether that list was accurate, inaccurate, had changed or was varied. When I was advised that I had been given a final list, that was the list that the Premier's office were telling me was
Then
the
you
master
discounted
list.
all the other lists before that.
Yes.
You didn't
so-
compare them or look at them.
No, we did
Because
not.
this original list, which does exist because we've got it, is different to the source of truth list. So we know that there have been changes between the original one and the source of truth, but at no point did you go and check that
No.
there had been...
No, we administered the program based on the list that we were given on the
But you were
28th
given
of
two
July
li-
that
you were
told
given two
us that this
lists.
was the final and approved list.
So you ignored the first list with all of the dates pre-election and just went with the source of truth list, which has dates all post-election, and you went for that.
Well, I received a list on the 14th of July, received a list on the 21st of July, both of which were called, one called first batch, one called second batch. Our understanding at the time was that the Premier's office were compiling the list from across all of the electorates, and they would bring us the final list and confirm for us that it was the final list that was the list that we would work on. And that is what we did.
Yeah, and you also had a list from the 14th of June, which we now have. But how do you know that Cherie Burden wasn't deceiving you about what were election commitments?
Well, I don't know that she was, I don't know that she wasn't. I have no reason to propose that any senior person operating in the Premier's office would want to deceive the department. So I had no reason to suspect that. I took no action on that assumption.
Well, how would you explain wild differentiations between the 14th of June list and the 28th of July list? How are these massive discrepancies electorate by electorate? Do you have any explanation for that?
I don't. Compiling the list was not our responsibility. We ran the program based on the final and confirmed list that the Premier's office told us was the source of truth and was the document that we would work from, and that's what we did.
Mr. Latham.
Thank you, Ms. Morgan. Who's Jo Mason?
One of my staff.
Was she still with you?
She has resigned, and she's now living in Victoria.
And when did she do that?
Oh, a couple of weeks ago. No, longer than that.
Right. Have you got any recollection of the work she was doing on this original list from the 14th of June? Because she emailed you on the 15th of June, early in the morning at 8:56 a.m, saying, "Hi Alison, here's a breakdown of the funding allocations, 498 funding recommendations going right through, 34 seats with partial allocation for parks and playgrounds at council level. I'm just working through the infrastructure types and we'll send to you shortly." Mm-hmm. And then a minute later, you respond, "Amazing, thank you."
Okay. So I had a team working on the background steps that have to be taken to get a grant program stood up. And that includes designing the guidelines against which we would assess the applications and building the forms in the 1GMS Smarty Grant system. So that was the work that she was working on.
So you do recall this original local small commitment allocation list?
Oh, I don't recall this specific list, as I said. I didn't understand, I don't remember that we had been given a preliminary list that early in the piece. From my recollection, I've told you about the batches and the forms that I believed we got. But we were certainly working at that time on trying to understand what were the projects that had been nominated, how were the guidelines to be structured, and how was the 1GMS Smarty Grant system to be established.
Right. Well, you had told Anne Lewis this was the original list and Jo Mason was doing some work on it. But is your evidence you've got no recollection of the work that Jo Mason did?
No, I have good recollection of the work Jo Mason did. I don't recall receiving a very early preliminary list, as you've talked about, the original list, on the 14th of June. I accept that it's here and that we did receive it. We were receiving copies of the list, versions of the list, in a rolling way as the Premier's office, as it was described to me, were compiling them and checking them and getting them together. We accepted that the final list for which we were to work was the one that came in on the 28th of July.
Right, but from what you've just said, is your evidence that you recall the work that Jo Mason was doing on the 15th of June, but you don't recall the document a day earlier?
I don't recall receiving that document on that day. I definitely recall the work that the team was doing to try to understand. We had meetings with a number of people in the Premier's office, and we were asking for information and advice as soon as we could get it about what kind of projects were being nominated, were there any electorates where there were not projects that were nominated and all the funding needed to go to councils for parks and playgrounds. So we were trying to structure that.
So when you emailed Anne Lewis on the 14th of June at 6 minutes past 11 at night, here is the original list I received last week for the local small commitment allocation, and you go on to say Joe Mason's going to be doing some analysis on it. Have you got any recollection who gave you the list, described as the original list?
I don't. It would have to have come from the Premier's office. There was no other source of us being able to get advice.
Have to have come from Cherie Burton or Paul Mills?
Probably one of those, but someone in the Premier's office. Most of the advice we received in those early days came through Paul Mills.
Okay. Well, if it was emailed to you by Cherie Burton or Paul Mills, where is it in the return to papers?
Well, I gather you have it because I've just been given a copy of
after
it.
3 calls. So it wasn't in the original call for papers in January. It was
No, where's their email to provide this
from
so-called
Paul
original
or
list?
Cherie, yeah. Well, we don't have that.
Where's that?
Oh, well, you'd have to put the question to them.
Yeah, but you received it.
Well, I can't tell you where they have their version
Shouldn't it
of
have been returned in the papers?
It did not come up in the search, clearly, when we did the search for papers.
So it's your evidence you received this hefty original list, hundreds of pages, and you told Anne Lewis about it on the 14th of June, but when it's searched for in the records, it doesn't exist. There's no record of Burton or Mills sending it to you.
Well, there must be, because we've returned it to you in the last call for papers, as the Deputy Chair has outlined, so it must be in the system.
You haven't returned...
I don't have any personal recollection of that one particular email.
Okay, can you take on notice a search for how you received this from Mills or Burton, and where's that email? And
well, I will accept at face value that I have received it via an email, but I'll have to...
Well, can you search for that at face value?
I can, and I can take that on
provide this
notice.
parliamentary committee with some accurate information to end our puzzlement? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So just coming back to this, because looking at this email that you have sent, the one that starts here is the original list I received last week, you're not emailing this as a forward. You're attaching this as a separate thing by the looks of it.
Well, it's possible that I was given it as a paper version, I suppose.
Well, that's my
I honestly
question
can't
to you.
remember.
I mean, it's very clear if you look at the third page of that email that it's been attached. Sorry, not the third, at the top, where it's very, very clear it's been attached as an Excel spreadsheet of 5.51 megabytes. So this isn't a PDF copy. This is an actual editable spreadsheet that you've emailed across. Do you have any recollection of accessing that spreadsheet and then going in and sort of, file, send, share, whatever?
Not at this, no, I don't. After this period of time, I would have sent 10,000 emails between those staff and myself over that time.
Yeah.
I don't remember that one individual email. We certainly received a series of spreadsheets from the Premier's office with the advice that they were working on them, they were preparing the full list, they were working with all of the electorates. And so for us, we were just trying to get the best sense that we could around what kinds of projects they were, how we would set up the guidelines, how we would set up the system. And once we had confirmation that we had the final list, that was the list that we worked from.
So given you would accept then on face value, looking at, I take it that you accept that you don't remember the email, but you can see this one that's been returned.
Sure.
You would take it from looking at this then that there was an attachment that was a spreadsheet that had this information in it.
I'd have to confirm that to see whether it came in, what system it came into, where it was received.
But you can see that it says 5.51 megabytes.
Certainly I can see
in the
that.
attachment field, and in the attachment field it says .xlsx.
I'd have to check whether it came to me. Did it come to someone else? Has it been
This is
attached?
sent by you.
But I could have attached it from somewhere else.
Yeah.
I don't know. I cannot confirm exactly how or when I received that spreadsheet. I will take on notice that I can go and check it for you.
But on the face of it, looking at that attachments
somehow
field,
I have clearly received one of the spreadsheets.
Yeah. in
of which
electronic form.
we received multiple versions.
Yeah. Are you aware that Ms. Burton told this committee that she only had a paper version of it?
No, I'm not.
You don't remember that from one of our earlier hearings?
I don't know that I've been in a room when she's given her evidence, and I haven't necessarily
all right.
checked everything that she has
Fine,
said.
I accept that. If I was to look on my, if you were to ask me if I'd received an email to my parliamentary address, I could do a search and find things that go back quite a few years. It's quite sophisticated. Are you able to do that search and find out for us?
Which is why I'm surprised that it didn't come up, but certainly I can do. We will take on notice to confirm who and when and how we received that email.
Thank you. I think I raised with you last time that my sort of biggest sticking point on all of this is that it wouldn't matter so much, I think, except for the fact that we have a set of guidelines that refers to one of the core criteria for a grant to be eligible, or for a project to be eligible, is that it had to have been an election commitment prior to the election. And we've talked before about the only evidence that has been provided has been this source of truth list in order to verify that. Does it concern you, knowing that there are multiple versions of the list, and having now been told about the big differences between the different lists, that perhaps those guidelines were not actually being met?
Well, we sought confirmation around the list of election commitments from the government after they were elected. I was given a list on the 28th of July where it was confirmed that this is the list of election commitments, and so that is the list that we have worked from. It is not our role, it is not my role to be advising political parties or doing any of the work on them around what their election commitments are.
It's your role under those guidelines. For a project to be eligible, you needed to have checked that it was actually made.
And the
as a
source for
commitment.
checking that was the list we were given on the 28th of July, and that is exactly what we did.
So now that you have had it brought to your attention that there are discrepancies in the list between what was actually agreed during the election period, do you have concerns that some of those projects are not in fact eligible under the guidelines?
I always understood that the early versions of the list we had, which I had thought were only from the 14th of July, 21st of July, and I now accept that there were some in June, were preliminary versions of the list, that they were being checked, that was being collated. So I'm not surprised that there were some changes or there were some discrepancies in them. But it was not up to me to be able to verify them or to do anything to check them. So we were relying on the government to tell us what their election commitments had been, and that is what we did.
Government questions?
Thank you, Chair. Just to reiterate, Ms Morgan, I think the question was asked by the Honourable Chris Rath. At no stage were you engaged in a conversation about changing lists or changing allocations. You simply got various iterations of what the government said was promised and took that at face value because it's your job to administer it rather than judge where that information came
The only
from.
time we got at all involved in changing things or requesting clarification was where we had either no contact details, where we had email addresses that didn't work for contacts or phone numbers that didn't work for contacts, and so we were unable to reach out to an organisation in order to get them to put in an application so it could be assessed. And I believe all of these emails have been provided to you, the emails verifying people's addresses and names. There was probably, I'm going to guess, 15 or 20 of them. And we've already provided documents and discussed. There were, I'm thinking off the top of my head here, but there was at least one or two that I know of where the project description was inaccurate, and we sought clarification around that because an organisation came to us and said, it's not an outdoor learning centre, it's a play garden in the school or whatever it was. And so if an applicant had said to us that's not the project that had been nominated as the election commitment, we went back to the Premier's office to get them to clarify that for us.
Yeah, so administrative nature only. Can I just, for the benefit of the committee, can I just table a document from the Parliamentary Budget Office relating to a directly analogous program that was put forward by the then government in March of 2023.
Can I just clarify, because I don't believe there was any directly analogous program. Which program are you referring to?
Well, it's called Investing in Local Communities. The date's the 16th of the 3rd, 2023, which I think was about a week before the election, referred by the Coalition to the Parliamentary Budget Office.
Thanks.
It's a grant program which was...
Can I just take a point of order, Chair? Sorry. This is an inquiry into the local small commitments allocation, which is a government-funded program, and whether or not it's within its guidelines. If it's this isn't about election commitments of any party before who are now not in government. So I don't see how this is actually relevant to the inquiry.
To the point of order, Chair, with all due respect, it's directly related to
How?
election commitments. You've just been quizzing the witness about the reconciliation of election commitments with the delivery.
And the witness has
this
said
is
what
a
happened
directly
pre-election
analogous
is not their
program.
area to look after.
This is a directly analogous program, and I think the government
not.
has a right to place on the record a compare and contrast.
But
which
this
is
program
exactly what we're
doesn't
doing.
exist because it's an election commitment and we lost and it wasn't implemented. How can you compare and that's not what we're here to do.
Okay, order. It is difficult to see how it's at all relevant, but I think we should allow the question and we will see where it takes us.
Well, just further to the point of order, Chair, that this has been raised by previous witnesses in the hearing, so I think it's well within the remit of the committee for us to examine it.
Which part of the terms of reference is it relevant? Could you just clarify?
Well, and related matters. I mean,
Oh, right.
you have been using this hearing.
All right, okay. Look, we don't need to have an argument across the table about it. Let's just allow the question. If this is where the government wants to use their time, let's just
fair.
allow. Go ahead.
So, if I could just read from the document, Ms. Morgan. The policy proposes to provide a total of $298.6 million, which I think is about 10 times the value of the program that we're talking about now, in grants to councils and non-government organisations to support local upgrades to sporting infrastructure across New South Wales, assist in delivering local projects through improving local amenities and expand local infrastructure and tourism. The policy proposes to provide a total of $160 million in grants for sporting infrastructure, $95 million in grants for local projects, $34.25 million in CapEx grants, and $9 million in other small projects. Have you heard of this program before?
No.
So there was no policy or admin work done on this?
Certainly not prior to the election, no.
No.
We
Okay.
didn't win the election.
We didn't
Sorry,
win. This is
sorry,
just-
can I just
Other
clarify?
related matters have to relate to
No,
what
just-
we're here to do, Mark.
Just so
not
we have a very
forward.
clear record, is this a grants program with projects to be selected after the election?
Well, it's the
So
government's
it's not
election.
a pre-election.
Well, 16th
program.
of March was pre-election.
It was an election
Sarah,
commitment that was never
No,
implemented
but
because we're not in government.
it's for projects that then get selected after the election.
Yes, it's exactly
Okay.
exactly like our program.
No, yours are-
No, yours had to be
The
beforehand.
guidelines were it had to be before.
So this is a program to invest
Oh,
in
Butters,
local
you can do
communities.
better than
dear.
this.
It's sent to the Parliamentary Budget Office for costing,
Yeah,
so it could be delivered if the previous government retained government.
yeah,
Not
we
for
didn't.
pre-election commitments, for post-election commitments.
I'm sorry, if a policy is submitted to the Parliamentary Budget Office for costing, it's a policy to
No,
deliver
but the
money. isn't it?
projects come after. The projects haven't been selected prior to
Sure,
the
and
election.
how is that qualitatively different to the LSCA?
Because that's the problem with this one, is
Your
that it
guidelines
was...
said you had to say pre-election where you were going to spend the
Well,
money.
but isn't that the point? There were no guidelines with this?
No, no,
You
it's
just
just-
ignore
it's
the
just
guidelines.
dedicated.
They
You
weren't-
guys
they weren't
wrote
for
them
yours
and you still
either.
can't follow them.
All right,
That's your
that's fine.
problem.
Is there a question?
So, you were in a similar role at the last election in terms of grant administration.
Correct.
Does it strike you as strange that you hadn't heard anything about this particular program?
No.
It's an election
It's an
commitment.
election commitment, Mark.
Would
lost.
would Cabinet or Treasury have any
I mean,
information on
we
this?
lost.
I can't answer that.
Program from
W-
opposition.
I would only hear about it if I and my team were asked to administer it.
So we've got a $300 million grant
This is
program.
embarrassing.
a $300 million grant program from the former government. You're in a similar role to what you are now, and you haven't heard of it.
Because we lost, Mark.
Because it wasn't implemented because we lost.
Nobody had approached me asking me to implement this grant program.
Right.
Future Fund for Kids didn't get implemented either.
Yeah.
Nor did any of the Greens policy.
That's right.
So with regards to this so-called conspiracy theory about the list being changed, did anything strike you as particularly strange in terms of those 3 iterations of lists that subsequently came through from the original one, and the fact that the government would say, well, this is the final list? Did anything strike you as strange at the time or raise any alarms with you?
No. I mean, it's an unusual way to structure a grant program, to nominate projects ahead of time. But all projects, we run targeted grant programs, and so we certainly are used to calling applicants who are considered eligible and then assessing their applications. And so that was how we treated this, as a targeted grant program. And that to be invited to lodge an application, you had to have been nominated as part of the pre-election period, as an election commitment. So the fact that it wasn't particularly strange. It would take a couple of weeks, and we would get rolling series of lists as they were all pulled together from across 93 different electorates. I guess that's not particularly unusual, especially immediately after an election where there's a new government coming in and there's a lot of things going on.
Yeah. And in your experience, had a grants program displayed this level of equity across the electorate before?
Well, you're asking for my opinion, which is not really something that I would do.
Well, you've
in
got
a committee.
experience in this area. You've seen grant programs before.
Well, we run community building partnerships and have since 2009. It's very similar. It runs right across all electorates. Certainly there are other programs that run across all electorates. Often they're targeted at specific types of infrastructure or specific projects or programs. Look, there are infinite ways that grant programs can be structured, without a doubt. But running something across all electorates isn't particularly unusual.
Okay.
No.
All right. You got anything?
Okay. Mr. Rath.
Thank you. The Minister, the Special Minister of State, has consistently said that he's relied upon the information that was provided to him from your office, from the recommendations that you've made. You recommended projects that were in breach of the guidelines, didn't you?
I don't believe we did, no.
What about in the case of Sydney?
And what about in the case of Sydney?
In the case of Sydney, there were errors, I think, was the word that was used previously, and that then an updated brief was sent to the Minister's office correcting those errors. But the original brief that was sent to the Minister's office, Tranche 7, was an error, meaning it was in error of the guidelines, wasn't it?
Well, at the time that it was sent to the Minister with that advice, it was not incorrect. It aligned completely with the master list we'd been given on the 28th of July.
Yes. So the source of truth document has the Sydney error in it.
Correct.
Then when the error is corrected, it just so happens that the corrected version of Sydney is the original 14th of June
Goes back.
list.
We have not done that reconciliation, so I don't know that.
But it's
Okay.
the assumption that we're making, if Sydney is incorrect in the source of truth document, but then correct in the original 14th of June document, how many other errors are in the source of truth document that are actually correct in the original 14th of June document? And I would say that there's quite a few. Wallandilly, Orange, Charlestown, Canterbury, Heffron. There are many differences between the source of truth and the original. So I suppose my question to you is, has any work been done to compare the original list to the source of truth? And if not, would you be able to undertake that work for us?
No and yes.
Good.
So work hasn't been done, but
No.
you could look at those
Of course
differences?
we could, if we needed to, yes.
Because-
I
because-
don't understand what the purpose of it would be, but I can. The grants have all been approved. More than half of them are now fully completed and acquitted. I don't know what action we could take.
But so I'll give an example in one seat, and I'll pick Wallandilly. The original list says very clearly that it's $400,000 to go to parks and playgrounds and local through local councils. There was a methodology around that, we understand. But on the source of truth list, suddenly there's all these different projects: money for the tennis club, the men's shed, the RF Rural Fire Service, a soccer club, and in the end, I think it's only one council grant of about $50,000. So somewhere between the June list and the one that you've worked off, what was just a $400,000 generic spread across councils suddenly becomes all of these projects. This list is dated that it was determined prior to the election. This has dates on it post-election. So wouldn't that be an example of a breach of the guidelines?
Well, our guidelines were written assuming that we would have one source of truth document provided to us by the Premier's office, which is what we did.
But you didn't.
So-
That's the issue, because
Well,
you
we
had
always
variations of
understood
the
that the
list.
earlier lists that we received were preliminary lists that were still being worked on and were still being confirmed. It was not our role to confirm whether projects on that list were election commitments or not. We were advised by the Premier's office that this was the list of election commitments, and that was the list that we worked from.
But I understand that, but the guidelines don't say that that they must be on the list given to you by Cherie Burden. The guidelines say that they must be election commitments.
And that is the
I
list
would
of election
suggest-
commitments
I
we
would
were
suggest
given.
that the 14th of June original list is the election commitments, not the source of truth document that was since updated, or I would say doctored, by Cherie Burden, that was given to you on the 28th of July. And we know that because of Sydney.
Well, I can't comment on that because I didn't prepare the list. I didn't prepare any of the early versions of the list. I didn't prepare the final version of the list.
But if Sydney...
I was given a list that I was told that was the list of election commitments, and that is the list that we worked from.
If Sydney was in error on the source of truth document, why wasn't work done to ensure that there weren't other errors that were given to the minister as recommended projects?
Well, nothing else was brought to our attention as having been incorrect.
Well, we would now say that Wallandilly, Orange, Charlestown, Canterbury, Heffron, there's a long list of other examples, differences between the two lists that could very well be errors that are essentially in breach of the guidelines, just like Sydney was.
Well, we would need advice from the Premier's office that there were other projects that were incorrect. It was not up to us to determine what are election commitments.
The minister has basically said that he was going off your advice from the program office
To approve projects,
to
yes?
approve projects. So
Correct.
he's basically taking no responsibility for the projects that he approved. He's saying I'm signing off on everything that's given to me by the program office. You're saying essentially that you're going off the list that was given to you by Cherie Burden and Paul Mills on the 28th of July.
Correct.
So the buck really stops with Cherie Burden and the Premier's office, doesn't it?
It's certainly with the Premier's office about the advice that we were given, yes.
Right. Does the minister have any role in this process?
Of determining what were election commitments? I
Yes.
don't know. That would be a matter for the Labor Party to determine. Election
Right.
commitments are decided by a
But
party.
he could be signing off on grants against the grant guidelines because you're using a faulty list that's given to him by you, which is given to you by his own party. Why doesn't the minister just pick up the phone to his own party and say, is this the correct list that I'm going off? Why are you being thrown under the bus in the program office by the minister when he could just pick up the phone to Cherie Burden and the Labor Party and say, hey, are these the actual election commitments? Because at the moment, the minister's just blaming you.
Is that a question for me?
Yes, is it unfair that you're being thrown under the bus by the minister?
Well, that's not how I would interpret it at all. We have administered the program in accordance with the Grants Administration Guide. We relied on the list that we were provided by the Premier's office. I don't see that we can have done anything else.
don't you think it's would be a more efficient and effective program given these errors that the minister should just contact the Premier's office to make sure that he's actually signing off projects or election commitments and that you're not using a faulty list?
Well, that would be something you'd have to ask the minister.
Did the minister's chief of staff, Damien O'Connor, ever communicate you to see the original list?
No.
Did you have any contact with him at all about the LSCA?
From memory, I had one briefing with him where we outlined the process that we would go through around contacting nominated organisations and how the assessment process would work. Other than that, I don't recall having had any direct contact with him around the LSCA program.
Do you accept that Sheree Burden lied to you?
I can't make a comment about that. I have no evidence that she's lied to me at all. I have no reason to suspect that anyone in the Premier's office has done anything other than try to assist us to administer this program properly.
But you do accept that she gave you a faulty list? The 28th of July list was faulty?
It did have some errors in it, yes,
right,
that we were advised of later.
What other errors besides Sydney have you picked up on and rectified?
Minor administrative errors, as I outlined before, things like incorrect email addresses for contacts in community organisations, which isn't at all unusual working with community organisations where volunteers are holding honorary roles would move around and resign and others would step in, phone numbers. And there were some minor changes to projects where the nominated organisation came forward and said to us, this is actually not what was agreed as the election commitment, it's something different. In most cases, they were relatively minor changes.
Did you take any contemporaneous notes about your interactions with Sheree Burden?
All the notes from the meetings that I had with them around this have been already tabled.
Right.
We met almost every Friday for the first 5-6 months, I think, after the election around this program.
And you, sorry.
Oh, just in the parks and playgrounds, if one electorate that full amount, my understanding is that it was broken up sort of on a per capita basis. So it wasn't evenly spread. If an electorate had, say, 4 councils, you wouldn't automatically get it across the 4 the same amount.
It was depended on the proportion of the population in
Right.
the electorate that lived in each LGA.
And if that didn't happen in a particular seat, would that be a breach of the guidelines?
Well, it would be an error for us in not calculating it properly.
So in Orange, the money that's gone out, it's been evenly split across the 4 local government areas, but I can tell you that the City Council area of Orange has a lot more residents than Cabonne. So why did each of the 4 council areas in Orange get $100,000 each?
It depends. Was that if it was nominated as an election commitment?
No, it was
before the
nominated as
election,
$400,000
in the seat of Orange.
across parks and playgrounds, but it isn't. It's not. It's evenly split across each of the 4 local government areas, not on a per capita basis. Can you explain how that would have happened?
No,
Because we asked the minister and he said it was based on your advice. So did you give him the wrong advice?
I'd have to take it on notice. We'd have to go and check the calculations that were done for that particular electorate.
Mr. Latham.
Yeah, thank you. Just going back to Joe Mason, if I can. At this time, where this original list comes through in the middle of June 2023, how many staff did you have working on the LSCA?
Probably 3 or 4 at that time.
Right. Did that include Anne Lewis?
Yes.
Right. So you had Anne Lewis and Joe
Mason.
Joe Mason and maybe 1 or 2 others working on it at that time. In the email to which you responded, amazing, thank you, where Joe Mason provided a breakdown of funding allocations into 4 different categories, she went on to say, I'm just working through the infrastructure types and will send to you shortly. Do you ever remember receiving a breakdown of the infrastructure types sent to you by Joe Mason at this time?
Well, I certainly did at some stage because they're outlined in the guidelines.
Okay, and has that been part of the return of papers?
I would imagine so, but I can take it on notice and
can
check.
Well, if you can find that from Joe Mason, because it looks like she's done a fair bit of work. And then on this 14th of June, where you inform Anne Lewis that Joe Mason's doing this very important work off the original list, you write, can you please start investigating the questions of electorates where projects have not been identified and how many LGAs were encompassed in the electorate chair's AGM, AJM. Do you remember Anne Lewis doing that work about the electorates where projects hadn't been?
Absolutely. It was a significant piece of work, yes.
Significant piece, so you recall that as well?
But it was done over a period of weeks, yes.
Okay. Well, if it was done off this original document on the 14th of June, you've only got 3 or 4 staff. 2 of them are working heavily to embed this document in the system with analysis of breakdowns of funding types, councils where they get the parks funding, questions where electorates where projects haven't been identified. In your normal work program and processes, once this 14 June document's been embedded, how could it be sort of lost in the system and then supplanted by something that was supplied in July?
Well, because the list of projects themselves, the final list of the organisations that had been nominated for us was the list on the 28th of July. So what we were looking for in these early days of trying to analyse this was what types of projects had been nominated, what types of organisations had been nominated, and we were trying to get a sense around how many of these electorates didn't have any nominated projects. They were to go into what we called the tranche B, which was the allocation across the LGAs for parks and playground upgrades. But that work wasn't able to be completed until after the 28th of July because we didn't have a final answer as to how many electorates had nominated projects.
Yeah, but you've got this original list on the 14th of June, which is every electorate with a comprehensive list of all the projects.
Which is, as I said to you at the beginning, I don't recall having a list of that level of detail quite so early in the process because it's quite different to what we received on the 17th, on the 14th, on the 21st, and then the final one on the 28th.
It may be, but you've got 2 of your 3 or 4 staff working on it with analysis, embedding it into the system as the head of these grants schemes in the Premier's department. Just how can it disappear to the point that you're explaining to this committee that it somehow became redundant and was replaced by something else that Cherie Burton gave you?
Well, I don't recall receiving it on the 14th of June, that form. I accept that I did. There's evidence in front of me that I did.
Do you recall Anne Lewis and Joe Mason doing work on it?
Definitely. Well, doing work.
Doing work on this list, this stuff from the 14th of June?
Not specifically on that list,
that?
but I accept that that's what they were doing. There's evidence here that they were. I can't remember that back that far around exactly what everybody was working on each individual day. But we had a team of people who were all working on pulling together guidelines, forms, assessment processes, probity plans, all of the things that we would normally need to prepare to stand up for a grant program.
Yeah, a small team doing what looked like substantial work at this time to be supplanted by the so-called source of truth document. The list of electorates that Mr Rath read out were all crossbench seats where these alterations have been made, and I don't want to be unfair on our good friend Cherie Burton, but independent analysis might suggest that a minority government had an interest in keeping the crossbench in the lower house happy, and maybe allowing them to get in and fiddle some of these grants were a way of doing that. Did you ever have any suspicion that this is what Cherie Burton was doing?
No.
None.
Can I ask, just around the work that the team was doing, and as we've seen in this email, Joe Mason doing some analysis on it now, so that we'll have an updated version, we can sort of manage a little better soon. Given that we're talking about 93 pages of information, or 93 different electorates, quite a lot of information here, and all of that work was being done. Presumably when an updated list came in, you didn't just start again. You would have run a comparison against the new and the old so that you knew what new information you needed to update.
Well, it depends on the information that you're looking at. When we started doing the early work on the program, we knew that we did not have the full list of the actual details of the organisations themselves that had been nominated. We were still waiting for that. They'd been told us very clearly that any preliminary lists we got were still being collated.
Yeah.
What it did tell us, though, was looking across the whole program, what kind of projects were being nominated,
Okay.
what kinds of infrastructure, and that was what we needed for the guidelines.
So when
So
they
the
change,
the list around who had actually been nominated, which individual organisation,
Yeah.
in order to enter them into the system,
Yeah.
none of that work commenced until we got the final list on the 28th of July.
but when Joe
this is all detail.
Mason on the 15th of June says, here's a breakdown of funding allocation, she says, there's this many that go to community organisations, this many local councils, parks and playgrounds, etc., etc. When that changed between the lists, those numbers would have changed. So you would have had to have done a comparison at some point to compare the work you'd already done with this new work.
Well,
with this new
we
list.
picked up the list from the 28th of July, and we knew that was the one to work to. So,
Yeah, but you'd already done work for a month.
in a general
wouldn't
sense,
restart
around
that
what
work, would
kinds
you?
of projects were coming in.
Yeah.
But it didn't require us. We did not have to go back and do a cross-reconciliation about what we'd been told in earlier lists, because there were gaps in all sorts of the early lists that we had.
So you started again. All of the work got started
No,
again.
we didn't need to start again. We still had the general overview. By the time we got the list on the 28th of July, we would have had, I'd have to check the exact timings of this,
Yeah.
but we would have had the guidelines fairly well written. Now, the guidelines would have said things like, these kinds of organisations will be eligible,
Yep.
these
Sorry,
kinds of
just in the
projects
interest
will
of
be
time,
eligible.
because we're talking about, you've done analysis, you've run analysis on a series of projects to
Yep.
work out how many are of what category. You then get a new list. Are you telling this committee you then started that analysis again, or did you compare what was old?
We wouldn't
and
have
new?
needed to start that analysis again, because the analysis that we'd done didn't
Yeah.
identify individual nominated projects. It just gave us the general information around the kinds of projects and the kinds of organisations.
But you could only work that out from knowing what the projects were.
Well, we could have a look at what they are,
Yeah,
but
so you would have had
may
to have
say
compared.
there's about 300 that would be upgrading sporting facilities,
Can I ask you,
that kind of generic thing.
you've said a few times that it's not your role to have gone past the source of truth document. When I've said, yes, but why didn't you
Correct.
get evidence to check? You've said it was not your role. Whose decision was it that that was not the role?
Well, I'm not aware of any public servants who've been involved in telling a government what their election commitments
no.
are or were.
Listen very carefully to the question. I'm asking whether or not, if you've got a guideline that says these had to have been pre-election commitments, I think it would be a reasonable thing to assume there might be different ways of getting that evidence. One of the ways might have been to ask for the emails that were sent to the community organisations at the time before the election, check the date, yes, that's before the election, or you could rely on a document given to you by the Premier's office. The decision was made to just rely on that document from the Premier's office.
Correct.
Who made that decision?
I did.
Did you document that decision?
Did I document that decision? I don't think I needed to document that decision. In discussions with the Premier's office, we were looking to understand what kinds of election commitments had been made, and we were told that they were pulling together the list. So we accepted that was going to be the evidence around what the election
So
commitments
when you
were.
put the guidelines together, after having received the list, the guidelines were published on the 30th or 31st, I think, of July.
Yeah.
So 3 days after you got that final official list, in it says that one of the criteria that your office would be tasked with checking is that it was a pre-election commitment. At that point of publishing those guidelines, had you already made that decision then that you would only be looking at a list, whatever list came
Yes.
from the Premier's office?
Yes, we had.
Government.
Can I just ask a question? It may be outside your purview, so please tell me. Given all of the questioning that's been raised in relation to this program after the last, what seems like 2 years of an inquiry, are you aware of any concerns amongst councils or community groups who receive grants that they may have to return them?
No.
Because there is certainly some scuttlebug out there and some concern in some groups that they're hearing that they may have not received these grants appropriately.
That hasn't been brought to my attention. I don't speak to most of those community organisations directly.
Yep.
My staff do, and generally now it's at the point of acquitting the projects as they're completed. So I haven't heard any of that. But we have legally binding contracts in place with those organisations. So if someone did flag any concern that questions being asked about the LSCA program, would I have to give the money back, we would reassure them that the state government's entered into a contract with them and they should get on and complete their project.
Could I ask that you just take on notice and maybe ask your staff if they're experiencing any concern from those councils or community organisations?
Certainly.
Because that's certainly what I'm hearing, that amongst some groups, not all of them, but certainly some organisations are saying, look, they're worried about their reputation given the fact of the allegations that have been made by some members of this committee, that they've received this information wrongly.
I'll take that on notice,
Okay,
certainly.
thank you.
Ms Morgan, with regards to the question that I think was asked by the Honourable Sarah Mitchell with regards to Orange, is it your recollection that the 400,000 was actually for different projects, not parks and playgrounds? Because that's the information I've got. So that the implication was that it wasn't properly allocated because the proportionality of LGAs within the Orange electorate was different, and you spread it over the 3 LGAs. But my information that it was actually for different projects. It wasn't for LGAs at all.
There were a number of park and playground projects that had been nominated prior as election commitments and were listed as as specific nominations. So they were a set amount of money allocated to a specific council for a park or a project upgrade. So where we treated those as a nominated project, and that the that nomination would stand according to the amount of money that had been nominated as the election commitment. Had there been no nominated projects provided and it was just open, then we used the formula that we had come up with, which was based on the per capita population across each of the LGAs.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think you might be confused. Anyway,
no, I think you're confused.
No,
All
I
right,
think you
order.
are. So the honourable member who's not with us at the moment, he asked for the Auditor General to report on this. Have you read that report?
I have.
And what was your takeout from that?
Well, the auditor found that we had administered the grant program in accordance with the Grants Administration Guide.
Yeah. There was also some questioning of Mr. Hatzistakos too from ICAC in budget estimates, I think. Are you aware of that testimony?
I am.
Any impressions from that?
Well, he made it clear that it was not up to public servants to be involved in the formulation of election commitments.
Yeah. I think that's all from us.
Okay. Any last?
Yeah, I just have a couple. Just if there has been, Ms Morgan, a breach of the guidelines, of the grant guidelines, what are the consequences of that?
If there have been a breach of the guidelines, well, I expect there would be advice to the grants team who had administered them that you've breached the guidelines. The contracts have all been let. As I said, the funding has been provided. I suppose there could be disciplinary action taken against me. Should that happen? I don't know. I've not thought about that.
Okay. And do you accept that the just to go to the Auditor General's report, that work was done prior to this original list being provided to the Parliament, so that might not have been available to the Auditor General at the time? Do you accept that?
Well, the Auditor General didn't look at any of the processes around the development of the list of nominated projects. They only looked at the processes that the Public Service had undertaken.
Right. Just going back to the issue of if there's been a breach of the grant guidelines, the Minister has said many times he signs off on what you recommend. Every time we've asked him about these discrepancies that we've found, he says, I go on the advice that I get given by you. That's been his answer many times. I know he's sitting behind you. We'll ask him about that in a minute. Just a bit of a heads up there, Minister Graham. But what's the consequences to the Minister if he's breached the grant guidelines, if he's signed off on things that are actually in breach of the guidelines that have been written?
Look, I can't answer. I don't know exactly, but if I were the Minister, I would be relying on the advice that I'm given by my public servants. So I would fully accept responsibility if I had provided incorrect advice to the Minister.
Okay, thanks, Jay. If anyone else wants to talk.
Just a quick one. When we were talking before about the emails with the Excel spreadsheet attached, if you could also take on notice, just to do a little click in the properties of the spreadsheet that you did receive, just to tell us who the author was and the date of creation of that document. That would
That
be
spreadsheet.
be
I will do
incredibly
so.
useful. Thank you. Anything
Mark,
else?
have you got anything?
Oh yeah, just coming back to this amazing, incongruous way in which the June document seemed to disappear from the work program. Ms Morgan, did you have a conversation with Cherie Burton along the lines where Miss Burton would have said, yeah, we've got that original document from June, but this one here in July is the one we need to work off now. It's the one that suits us best?
I definitely had a conversation with them to say to me, we've had multiple versions of these spreadsheets coming through, which they had made very clear that early versions that we received were incomplete, were still being checked, that the full list was being collated and being verified, and that they would advise me when they had the full and final and complete list of the election commitments, and that was the list from which we would work.
So when you say they, who are you talking about?
Well, there was Cherie I spoke to about it, Ms Burton. I spoke to Paul Mills about it. And so that was why we made it very clear when we received the list on the 28th, we went back and confirmed, is this the final master list?
Right.
The advice we received was, yes, this is the final master list. So that was always the list that we worked from.
Right, and how many times did that conversation take place, do you think? How many earlier iterations were there of what you now call the final list?
Well, we definitely received one on the 14th of July. We definitely received one called the first batch. We received another one on the 21st of July called the second batch. And then we received a list on the 28th of July, which was the final one that was confirmed.
Right.
And I will accept at face value that there
Right.
seems to be
So
evidence
there
that we'd
seems to be
received
about
something earlier.
5 different batches that have evolved.
Which was
over-
what we were told would happen, that they were out there working across all of the electorates with their officers to gather the information about the full details of the election commitments that had been made prior to the election.
Right, but wouldn't anyone looking at this June list think it was very comprehensive and complete?
Possibly. I didn't ask any of my staff, or I don't recall asking them about that June list. It was made very clear to us that they were working across all the electorates to bring all that information together into a formal final list. We confirmed that the list from the 28th of July was the final and confirmed list, and that was the list we worked from.
Right, but you had enough confidence in June to have Joe Mason and Anne Lewis working on analysis of...
Absolutely. There
This
was no
list.
reason why we couldn't start analysing any early information that we got to give us some advice about what types of projects were being nominated, what kinds of organisations were being nominated. We needed that information to get the guidelines ready. We didn't need to know the details of the exact organisations themselves. We just needed to know some high level across the program sense about what sorts of projects these were and what sorts of organisations they
but
were.
at no stage did you do analysis of differences in the list that Ms
At
Burton
no
and-
stage did we compare those lists because we understood that they were preliminary and they had not been finalised.
Right, where's that advice?
I'm giving you that advice.
Right, but is that in writing from Cherie Burton and Paul Mills that these were preliminary lists?
I
This one here is
received that
just described as the
I
original
received that
list.
advice face to face in the meetings that I had with them. We met every Friday, as we've said, and they were that yes, we're working on it. We're still working on different electorates. Things.
She was working on them all right.
Did
on the
you
crossbeam.
take notes during those Friday meetings? Have you got a
I have
written record of
tabled
them
those
telling you
notes.
it's a preliminary?
Certainly did not take verbatim notes, but
That's
I did
convenient.
take notes of the meetings, and they have been tabled.
Okay. That does bring us to the end of this session with you. Thank you very much for coming and giving us evidence again. We do appreciate it. To the extent there are questions taken on notice or supplementary questions, Committee Secretariat will be in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It was amazing.
Do you remember? I don't think.
Minister Graham, you do not need to swear an oath or affirmation, as you've already sworn an oath to your office as a Member of Parliament. But would you like to commence by making a short opening statement?
No, having appeared before, I'm happy to jump into questions.
Thank you. I'll start with the opposition. Mr.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister, for appearing today. Minister, it's become quite clear that the list of election commitments made by the Labor Party is significantly different from the list assessed by the LSCA Program Office. When did you become aware of the original list held by Alison Morgan on 14 June 2023?
Well, I don't accept your first proposition other than in respect of the errors that were identified in the Sydney list. I think that's clear, and that's something I've answered a number of questions about. So as I've indicated to the House and I think to this committee, I did develop some concerns about those commitments, and I asked for those to be checked, and errors were identified. So beyond that, I don't accept the position you're putting.
I might just get the committee staff to give you a copy of the 14 June list and then the 28th of July list in the email correspondence as well. But in the meantime, Minister, what errors were you made aware of?
In the Sydney list?
Or any errors?
Yeah.
What errors in the program?
In terms of errors, I think this has been well canvassed. I asked for the commitments in the Sydney list to be checked after I had a discussion with Jenny Leong, who indicated that there had been some consultation. So those are the errors that I'm aware of in the list. I'm not aware of errors beyond that.
Not aware of any errors beyond Sydney?
No, there were exemptions granted for what I'd describe as a small number of projects that didn't meet the guidelines, but in each case where a project didn't meet the guidelines, that was identified by the Program Office. I've signed off on those, having weighed them up, and in each of those cases, to my recollection, I followed the direction of the Program Office. I thought they were reasonably pragmatic. They're, for example, a project outside an electorate that benefited an electorate. So there are a number of those exemptions.
Were there any errors in Wallandilly?
Not that there's been none identified in the paperwork that have come to me, so no, not that I'm aware of.
None in Orange or?
You've seen the paperwork that's come to me, so it does not identify any errors other than the paperwork in relation to Sydney. As you're clear, that Tranche 7 brief didn't actually make its way to me. The first time I was aware of the Tranche 7 brief was when I was asked about it at this hearing.
What explanation do you have, Minister, between the wild deviations of the 14th of June original list from 2023 and the 28th of July source of truth list?
Look, I think after the concerns were raised, as I've indicated in the House, I went to seek a verbal briefing. I wanted to know there's been a suggestion in the calls for papers now that there's multiple lists. I sought a briefing, as I've indicated, from the Program Office, from the Premier's Department. As I've indicated, that was a verbal briefing, and I heard very much the story that you've heard just now from the program office. It was put to me this was an iterative list, there were preliminary lists, but they were very, very clear that the list that was being used to operate the scheme was the 28th of July 23 list. So that, I asked a number of questions about that in order to satisfy myself. Very much I heard the same information that you've had put to you today about the way that process happened, that first batch, second batch process.
But for Sydney, the 28th of July list, Sydney was in error. It was then corrected to be the 14th of June list. So the 14th of June list, the original list for Sydney, was correct. But the 28th of July list was in error. So how many other errors are there on the source of truth list? And shouldn't we be referring to the original list as opposed to the source of truth list? Because it was correct for Sydney.
Yeah. Well, I don't accept. I don't know what the differences are between the lists. You've asked
Quite a few.
Yeah. Well, you've asked for that information. Understood. But I'm not aware of other errors in the list that have been put to me. They haven't been identified. There have been exemptions identified. There were errors in relation to the Sydney electorate, as I said, that I'd asked about. There were not others identified.
So it's just a coincidence that the original list for Sydney was correct, but the source of truth list was incorrect.
I wouldn't use the word coincidence, no.
Right. Minister, are you aware that the guidelines say, quote, that all projects must have been nominated as an election commitment prior to the March 2023 election?
Yes.
And what did you do to satisfy yourself of that in the guidelines?
Yeah. I signed off the guidelines along those lines. Look, my expectation, it's not unusual for the government to be dealing with election commitments. We make a whole lot of election commitments that are tracked through central government in the way I understood these were. And that's a routine process handled by usually by the Cabinet Office or the Premier's Department, recalling they were the one thing when the government was elected. So these were dealt with in the same way. I did sign off those guidelines that were recommended to me by the agency. I thought they were comprehensive. In fact, I can guarantee you they were a lot more comprehensive than many of the grants guidelines that had come before.
After the... Sorry.
Oh, yeah, I just want to say, you may not have heard, but Ms Morgan before effectively said that they trusted what the Premier's office told them about that being the source of truth, that 28th of July document. But Ms Morgan now accepts that there was a 14th of June version, which, as Chris has said, that has the correct figures for Sydney that ended up being paid out. Now that you know that there was this original list and that there are differences, are you concerned that you may have inadvertently breached the guidelines because you've been given the wrong information about what was the true election commitment?
Well, I don't accept your characterisation of the list, having it just been put to me this morning.
But
that this
here,
is so.
John. It's black and white.
Well, look, it's just been handed up to me now. As I said, I sought a briefing from the program office along these lines. The position they put to me, I've found reasonably persuasive about the iterative nature of the list. I pressed a number of questions about it. The list on the 14th of June did not come up in that briefing.
Right. So just when you knew the Sydney electorate was wrong and there were errors, and you've just said now that's the only one outside some exemptions and minor things, when you had that briefing, did you ask, were there any previous versions of this list? Where did the correct Sydney advice come from? Did you seek to sort of assure yourself that the list was correct?
Yeah, so recall on the 21st of August 2025, that was after a number of lists had been called, called up in a call for papers. This had come to the House. There were some potential questions to me. I can't remember the way in which it was raised. And I naturally sought a briefing from the program office at that time to say, what are these multiple lists? How do they relate to the list on which we...
Did you ask for copies of the multiple lists?
No, I haven't asked for copies. I haven't done my own analysis.
Why
All
not?
this is... look, I'm relying on the very good public servants to do their job. I did want to assure myself by quizzing them directly.
John, but Minister, the issue is you're relying on the public servants, but the public servants are relying on the list that's given to them by the Premier's office, Cherie Burden and other Labor operatives. Did you ever pick up the phone to Ms Burden and the caucus liaison office and say, hey, is this the correct list that you've given to the department? Because at the moment you're just throwing the program office under the bus rather than your own party.
I don't accept that, and I think, look, I have found the program office to be, and the Premier's department to be doing some excellent work. The public servants there don't deserve to be dealt with in the way they have been. So I think they've done excellent work to craft these guidelines and administer this program. I've found the paperwork high quality, and I'm extremely grateful to them.
But you're the minister that signs off, and the guidelines clearly say they have to be pre-election commitments. You know that has been formulated from your leader's office, the now Premier's office. So at no point have you spoken to anyone in the Premier's office and said, hey guys, just want to check that this is 100% right. You know, I'm not being stitched up here as a minister signing off on something that was wrong. You've never done that, never spoken to Cherie Burton about this at all.
I'm not detailing all the discussions with my colleagues, but I have been upfrI'm with the House. If I've had
I'm
concerns...
asking you, have you talked to Cherie Burton about these different iterations of
look,
these
I'm not going
lists?
into all the discussions I've had inside government. That's not unusual in these committees.
It's not a hard
But
thing to
if I've had
answer,
any
to be
concerns...
transparent. Have you talked to her about it?
If I've had any concerns, I've raised them. I did have concerns about the City of Sydney. I haven't had concerns other than that.
Mr. Latham.
Thanks, Minister. In terms of being upfront, why did it take 8 attempts to get from you the truth of how you found out about the Sydney errors, problems, alterations by talking to Jenny Leong? We asked you a whole series of times, and what changed that allowed you to tell us it was through the conversation with Leong, who'd spoken to Greenwich, who'd obviously said, you know, I've had some input here and I'm getting some results?
Yeah, look, I think I was asked in the House on one occasion, how did I know? And I couldn't at that moment, under serious questioning by the opposition and the crossbench, I couldn't at that point recall what had sparked my concern first. But I then, on reflection, when I was next asked about it, as my recollection, I was able to recall the dates of when I'd had that discussion with Jenny Leong. So it was more about the timing, is the answer. One of the reasons why I was able to recall the date of that conversation is we're keeping a record of the interactions I have with MPs on these matters, and that's been produced in the call for papers. So
Right, and finding out about the member for Sydney and the opportunities he'd had to alter the grants according to his own priorities. Did the penny drop for you that this is an important guy on the crossbench to keep the Labor Party in government, minority government in the LA, and perhaps some inquiry should be made about changes that other crossbenchers have made?
No, I don't accept this is all about the crossbench. I know that's how the opposition is characterising that, but they've actually made a spray of allegations about a series of crossbench seats, about seats that are held now by the opposition. So while it's been characterised in that way, actually they're making suggestions about a whole range of seats.
You didn't make any broader checks than the electorate?
Yeah, no, look, I have obviously made some checks, as I've indicated, that this process has been dealt with appropriately.
What are those checks?
Well, as I've said, I've had this 21st of August briefing. If I've had any concerns, I've asked for briefs to be checked, and I've relied extensively on the...
Right, and how many electorates have you done that in?
It's really the Sydney electorate that I developed
Only
those
Sydney.
concerns.
Only Sydney. In terms of this, what we're now calling
But
the 14
Mr
June...
Latham, I think this is important. After the concerns were raised more broadly about the other lists, this electorate, that electorate, by the way, not all crossbench electorates, that's when I sought the briefing from the program office, and it was in terms similar to what you've just heard, and I found that persuasive.
Right, and how many electorates have alterations been made after the 14th of June?
I am not... I don't know the answer to that question.
You don't know the answer?
No.
In terms of this, what we're now calling 14 June document, which is very comprehensive, for the 93 seats, there are only 7 individuals listed as organisers, persons notified of approval. They are Blake Mooney, Lucy Margett, Liam Rankin, Oliver Plunkett, Alex Costello, James Callow and Rhys Patton. Would you understand those 7 to be Labor Party field officers who worked in these electorates in the election campaign that ended in March?
I wouldn't feel confident saying that, but I wouldn't be surprised if there were. There's certainly a number of them are Labor Party members, yeah.
Okay. So wouldn't you expect that by the middle of June, 3 months after the election, the people who are the field officers in each of the 93 seats know, as of the election night, what were the LSCA commitments, and once set in stone they couldn't possibly change?
Yeah, I mean,
Isn't that how it's supposed to work?
I saw this as just the routine. This is when any party comes to government, there's a process of capturing all the election commitments centrally, transmitting them to the public service, and then those are then processed. I mean, that's the usual process, and I saw this as going through the usual process.
But wouldn't you expect these 7, 3 months after the election, given that these commitments can't change after election night, that these 7 would have given, as they appear to have given here, very comprehensive listings of what the commitments were as of the middle of June?
Look, I can't comment because I know this has been provided to me now, but I haven't.
Yeah, it's the first time as Minister you've seen this June document.
I wasn't aware it was in the call for papers. Just to be clear, I haven't sought to trawl through I've answered all the questions.
Will you undertake analysis of it now as to how much changed?
Well, I think you've asked that of the program
means by
office.
which it changed, and what appears to be, realistically in politics, the role of Cherie Burton in changing these grants in consultation with crossbenchers for political reasons that just shouldn't have happened.
Well, I don't think
Isn't that the inquiry we now need, seat by seat?
Yeah, I don't think the evidence has been stacked up for that, but you've asked for some of that from the program office today, and they've said they'll complete that analysis.
But as a responsible minister, shouldn't you be ordering that inquiry and investigation? Because this looks terrible.
Yeah, look, I'm certainly happy to examine any of the issues that arise out of today.
Minister, you signed off on the program guidelines, correct?
Yes, correct.
Which were published on the 31st of July. The first, I believe, eligibility criteria or criterion was that these actually be pre-election commitments. We heard from Ms Morgan before that a decision was made to only, I guess, satisfy that element by looking at what she's been referring to as the source of truth document. Did anyone ever discuss that decision with you?
You'll have to repeat that question.
So if we take a step back, there's lots of ways that you could satisfy, a certain criterion. In this case, the criterion was that it had to have been a pre-election commitment. Ms Morgan says that she made the decision to satisfy that only by looking at, this source of truth document that was given to her by the Premier's office, instead of, for example, going and requiring evidence of emails that were sent from candidates to groups or whatever.
Okay,
there's lots of ways you could do it.
Yeah.
The decision was made to only do it based on that source of truth document. Did anyone discuss that decision with you?
Look, I was certainly aware, because I signed off the guidelines, that these had to be election commitments and that would be dealt with in the usual way. That is, the government would supply lists of election commitments. So it wasn't canvassed that there'd be an additional checking for these election commitments.
Can I just pick you up there, because you talk about it being an election commitment. The program as a whole was an election commitment in the ordinary way, but these allocations made pre-election are slightly different, because we're talking about evidence that they were actually pre-election commitments. In terms of the evidence required to satisfy that requirement, did anybody discuss with you what evidence should be collected?
I don't really accept the distinction you're making. Look, it's just not unusual after an election to have election commitments big and small to keep track of. It's a major job for the public service and for an incoming government to transmit those. Some of those are large, some of those are small, and tracking them all down, making sure they're all captured.
So perhaps I could...
And this was dealt with in the usual way Yes, I'll let you...
Sorry, just perhaps I could just make it easier by looking at, if we look at, for example, pre-election commitments of that kind that are given to the PBO to cost, for this particular one, It was the total value of the program
Yeah.
which was put forward.
Yeah, I think
and
that's
so I
fair.
understand that the program then, once you won election, could be passed on to the public service. But then the guidelines were created which referred to one of the requirements for actually expending that money to be that it had to have been a commitment made in that particular seat by a candidate or by the party to particular people. There's different ways you could satisfy yourself that it was in fact a true pre-election commitment to that particular recipient. Did anyone discuss with you how they would satisfy themselves that a promise had been made to a particular recipient ahead of the election?
Yeah, well, look, I think that was captured in the guidelines that the list would be. That I was certainly aware that a list would be provided.
That's not what the guidelines say.
No, the guidelines indicate they'd be election commitments. I was certainly aware that a list of all the election commitments would be provided in relation to this
And you
process
were
by central
happy
government.
that
that's
was the process? That there
Yeah,
shouldn't be any
look-
further interrogation of that list?
Well, I see that as the usual process where central government provides.
There is no usual process for this, though.
Well,
We're not
there
talking about
actually is.
election commitments
Well, it's an
as a
unusual
whole.
scheme.
We're talking about individual promises
Very unusual.
as part of a program which was then to be implemented
Yeah.
afterwards. So that's not coming from government. That's actually needing everybody to have worked out who they promised a thing to in order to satisfy that criterion.
Yep.
Were you aware of the decision to just take on face value a list given by the Premier's office instead of actually going and getting the evidence?
I understand the distinction you're making, but I don't accept it. In the transport world, for example, we might both have an election commitment about a broad set of commitments, but also a specific commitment in a specific electorate. And that's wouldn't be unusual for that to be the case. Both of those need to be transmitted.
Guidelines for that then saying that it had to have been, so that actually being a criterion of the relevant guidelines or criteria for expending that money. It's quite different, isn't it, to a transport project
Yes,
within an electorate?
I accept that is less usual, but I don't think it explains why the public service would deal with it differently.
We'll come back. Sorry, Government.
Thanks, Chair. Minister, are you aware of the Araman Benevolent Society receiving grants approved by the Premier under the previous government?
Oh, well, I had been asked a number of questions about this issue over the course of the last week. A number of them were wrong in fact. For example, it was asserted that this company was not eligible and should not have been given a grant. That was factually totally incorrect. It was eligible. That checking had occurred. In addition, the assertion was it was a company limited by shares. That was wrong. In fact, it's a company limited by guarantee. It is a company that's received, it is a society, is probably the better way to put it, that's received grants from the former government, signed up by the former Premier. I'll just make the point that these are not unusual, these grants. They're often going to... That was a grant for a place of worship for security. I would regard that as a good thing to be funding at the moment, given the tensions we're all aware of.
Yeah, in fact, highly unremarkable given the tensions that have been happening. Minister, with regards to the line of questioning we had of Miss Morgan, which sort of suggested that in her role, she should have questioned the various iterations of lists. It's a little bit unfair, isn't it, to expect a public servant to say to the Premier's office, well, I don't think that list is right because this original list says this. The reality is that there's a multiplicity of sources coming in from 93 seats, which are developing in various iterations because of the gathering of information, and the public servants got to accept the Premier's office on face value as to the final list.
Look, I almost don't quite agree with that. If the public service have got to be satisfied that they're playing their role, and if there are multiple lists, I would expect them to ask, look, what are these
Which
multiple
is the one?
lists?
Yeah.
I understand that did occur. In fact, that was put to me pretty persuasively by program office, which is why I've accepted that. So, yeah, look, I think public servants have got a really important role to play. My perception is they have played that role faithfully and well in relation to this program, but governments are allowed to make election commitments. They need to catalogue those and pass them to central government, and that's the usual process for any of these election commitments.
And Miss Morgan's testimony about the previous government, I stress government's proposition of a almost $300 million grants program, does that strike you as somewhat strange that she knew nothing of it, given they were in government?
No, I thought her explanation of that it may not have been with her area of government made sense. I am concerned about that program though. This is 8 times as big. It contains a number of commitments that were made before the election, some that were to be made afterwards. It's very opaque. It's very large. Almost all of it ends up in coalition seats. So I do think it's extraordinary. I don't mind answering questions about this program that gave $400,000 to each electorate, regardless of who won the election. I think that's totally legitimate, and I strongly support the upper house asking whatever questions it does. I do think it's incredible that the coalition were running a similar scheme at the same time with no controls that went entirely to their electorates, that was 8 times as big. Some committed beforehand. We know a little bit about what some of those projects were, but some of which are totally unclear.
In fact, if I
I'd
could...
encourage the upper house to inquire further about the nature of that, possibly through a call for papers.
It doesn't exist, John. Even you can't
Well,
say
that
it.
is absolutely not true. These are.
What money's been paid out of
Well,
that
point
one?
of
No, I
order,
can tell
there's
you
been
what-
interjections
I
in the
can
minister's
place on the
response.
record if you'd like.
They're funding
Some of what was.
commitments.
What was this is a range of pork barrelling to the Wakefield Park Raceway, to the Metro car park at Tallawong, the Headliner Act Regional Touring Fund, which I recall well, the Young Police Station, a series of smaller grants. This was, and it all went to coalition electorates. So I just strongly encourage the upper house to play the same forensic role it's played on this program, and in my view, appropriately. I'd also extend a look at this program.
How do you think the previous government would have gone had they been successful standing up to the same level of scrutiny had that program been?
Point of order, Chair. That's a hypothetical question.
that is getting pretty hypothetical, but I encourage your...
And asking for his
That's one for
opinion
the
as
House.
well. There you go. That's a
No.
double whammy.
I'd be happy to
Oh.
answer that in the
I
House.
think the interjections speak for themselves.
Oh. Minister, I asked Ms Morgan the same question that I'm about to ask you, and that is, as a result of the claims being made by the opposition and members of the crossbench throughout this eternal inquiry, there is concern amongst some councils and community groups about the funding that they've actually received. And the questions are being asked, will they have to pay the money back? Is it illegitimate? What's happening? Have you heard any such scuttlebutt? And I'm just wondering where you think that's up to and if that's a concern.
Well, I'd be unsurprised if some of the good community groups with almost no money, many of whom are making resources stretch a long way, were concerned that they might have to give this back. That'd be terrible if that was the case. That's not the government's intention, but I'm not clear on what we're being asked for here. This has been a campaign against men's sheds, parks, security for places of worship, homeless services. I think these public funds has gone in small amounts to really valuable uses. It's also gone in equal amounts to every part of the state. And look, anyone who's around this table who saw the grants previously knows how different that is to what was going on in the former government and what the former government intended to do if it was re-elected. That's also clear from the program that the Honourable Mark Buttigieg is indicating. So, look, I don't mind the questioning, but I can understand why community groups might be concerned that this is, if they think that the opposition's campaigning for this money to be handed back in. it is, if there are,
Suggested.
Name
if
a
there
person.
are,
Name one group. Sorry.
if there are,
Order on myself.
I'm referring to Chris Rath's campaign against men's sheds, parks and homeless services that he's been
Joel,
running.
you're better than that.
Well,
Well, how about we let
it's
him
actually
answer the
against
question?
your
Otherwise,
campaign.
I'm happy to
Breaching the
interject
grant
throughout.
guidelines.
Yes. No, you
Okay.
are. I uphold the point of order. You
I
are correct.
apologise.
We will
Thank you.
behave ourselves.
Minister, can I ask you to please proceed in an orderly way?
I think I'd largely concluded my answer.
Thank you. I couldn't hear the last part, but I appreciate it and I'll read it in Hansard.
Minister, can I just ask you to clear something up that was raised by the Honourable Chris Rath in estimates with regards to this program? That was a social media post of Jerome Luxale cutting a ribbon for Ron Payne Park, North Epping. But I think the grant was actually for North Epping Oval, is that correct?
Yeah, look, this is just one of the litany of errors, as suggestions have been made about this project. The assertion was there's a federal MP who's there as one of these projects gets announced. That was wrong. That was just categorically wrong. There was a photo waved around asserting that it was one park when it was a totally different one. The two different parks, Ron Payne Park, North Epping, the other North Epping Oval, they're totally different places. Just one more error of fact. Like there have been about 10 or 11 or 12 complete errors of fact asserted as being entirely correct. It's one of the frustrations. I don't mind being asked legitimate questions, but these assertions are not being made. Is this true? This is asserted as fact every time. It's just categorically wrong. This was another couple of examples of that being the case.
And just something else in terms of the earlier question from Mr. Latham, which was, I think, that all seats had no individual projects in the early list. This was this 14th of June list, I think. But then in the source of truth iteration, the individual projects were allocated towards the crossbench. Can you enlighten us on the veracity of that claim?
Look, I can't shed too much light because I have not been forensically examining these different lists. I have been briefed by the program office. I can confirm that despite the fact the coalition's been asking about and presenting this as about independent electorates, in fact the issues they're raising what they're doing is failing to mention the ones that are in opposition electorates. So,
In fact, I think Epping,
these are
Castle
not-
Hill, Kellyville.
Like what?
yeah.
Like what?
Well, actually, Mark
Epping,
Buttigieg's just.
Castle Hill, Kellyville.
Yeah, but how
Yeah.
do you know that?
I'm just saying these are opposition assertions. They're probably wrong. They could be wrong. I agree with that. But in fact, while this is being presented as
You said you
This-
only knew the changes in Sydney. How do you know these other ones?
how do I know the I'm just saying the opposition assertion, while they've raised concerns about, I've got concerns about Sydney, those errors have been fixed. The opposition's got concerns about a range of seats. Those include opposition seats, something they're not.
Minister,
They have not been
Minister, have you-
upfront about.
Did you ever manage to figure out who Jerome from Epping was as the contact person on the Epping LSCA grants?
I think what I stand by the evidence I gave last time, which is I understand why you're asking the question, but I don't accept your assertion that these are the decision makers for the program. Something you've been repeatedly wrong about, by the way. The Premier's office and the program office have been clear. There were people going around collecting the contact details for these programs. So there's no evidence about that wasn't the case here.
So, Minister, just with the different variations of the list, and it's probably worth you and your office going to have a look at the difference between the June list and the July list. Did you just say before, in a question from Mr. Buttigieg, that you did discuss with the program office the different versions of the list, and you were assured that they had checked to make sure things were lining up? Is that what you said?
Yeah, so I'm referring to the 21st of August briefing. So the opposition,
Yeah,
after calls for papers,
Yeah.
there was a briefing, and I've retailed the story from that briefing.
Yeah.
And my question was, well, there appear to be different lists. What's going on here? Why? How have you administered this program, how are you confident of the list? They've indicated they are administering this list off the 28th of July, and Ms Morgan's taking you through her rationale in far more detail.
But at that August briefing, did you check that they had, looked at the differences between the list and made sure that everything was still consistent? Is that what they said to you in that briefing?
They said it was an iterative list, that they were given preliminary lists, that a final list was confirmed. It was the list of 28th of July. That was what they were administering it off.
But did you ask them if they had, as we'd asked earlier, checked that it was all okay throughout that process?
Yeah, look, I was keen to assure myself that they had a list that they were confidently working off, and having done that briefing, they made it clear that this was the list they were operating off, and they had what was relatively persuasive at the time, a story about the iterative list.
Right. And just before, you said that some organisations had concerns about, that this was a war on men's sheds, and we were doing all of that, I think, in response to Mr Primrose. Which organisations have spoken to you about that, Minister? Can you name any?
Well, I won't name them in order to protect their identities.
Oh, that's convenient.
But a number of your lower house colleagues have raised serious concerns about what you're up to, what it means for their local electorates. They're parading around celebrating these grants, often claiming credit, and they're not very impressed with some of what you're... And I won't name them.
So we take it at your word.
Their identities.
There's all these people who are up in arms over it, but you can't tell us.
You've got to hang on to the furniture.
You're better than this, Sarah.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank
Your lower house colleagues' names are safe with me.
Minister, so you only checked the error, just to be clear, you only checked whether errors were made for Sydney, not the other 92 electorates.
No, I don't think that's fair. I think the opposition, as you know, the opposition's raised concerns, and where the opposition has, I have tried to check those or tighten some of the processes. I'd characterise this in the same way. There were concerns raised about how do these lists relate. That was when I sought the briefing from the program office.
What other seats did you check whether errors existed?
It was a very similar discussion to the one you've just had with the program office. It ended up, but given the nature of their explanation, it ended up being much more about the process than individual seats.
So you're 100% confident that the source of truth document contains no errors except for Sydney?
Look, this is the list that it's been administered off. Wherever I've had concerns, I've raised them. I did have concerns in relation to the electorate of Sydney. A member of Parliament said, look, there's been some consultation. Can I change my list? I said, no, I don't believe you can. And I sought assurance that the list was correct for Sydney. They're the errors I had concerns about.
Did you ask for briefings on the list for seats of Orange or Wallandilly? Because we've raised those with you.
After you raised those...
Yep. What did you find out about those?
I went back and talked to the program office. It was a verbal briefing, but you've had a very similar...
convenient.
You've had it's actually not convenient. I'd be happy to, any of the paperwork I've had, I've released. We're not shy about what the written briefings are, but I went and sought a briefing. You've asked me about it. I've encouraged you to ask.
No, but I'm asking you now. Okay, let's take Wallandilly for an example. The June list, which you can go and have a look at tonight after you've finished here, says all of that's going to parks and playgrounds. The July source of truth list suddenly has all these different community projects on it. Did you ask the program office to explain to you why there was that discrepancy?
I've asked about the process and why there were discrepancies.
What did they
as
say
the
for
opposition
Wallandilly?
were asserting. I haven't asked it at specific levels because their explanation was quite
so what was their explanation?
And part of the issue is your case has been hugely undermined
no.
by the multiple errors of fact.
Well, this is not an error, Minister.
Well,
there is one list says one thing
and
the other says others. You sign off on it. This is on you. If it's wrong, it's your scalp, right? You might have to resign over this if it all falls apart, let's be honest. So a seat like Wallandilly, where there are big differences between the June list and the July list, your evidence to us today is, it was a verbal briefing and I just believe what I was told by the program office. Is that your evidence?
I've taken you through the verbal briefing and I've been clear about what the content of that was.
What did they say about Wallandilly?
We discussed the process that was followed, not individual electorates.
So you didn't check that what you've signed off on in a seat like Wallandilly, where there are big differences, that you were correct in what you've done. You haven't.
Yeah, no, I have gone back to check that the process is operating, and I'm satisfied after that briefing that it was.
But, Minister, just to be clear, you've asked the Program Office about the list and whether there is any errors and what the process is. But just to be clear, they're relying on the list that is given to them by your own party and your own party's operatives like Cherie Burden and Paul Mills.
I just like the public service is often in the position where they're administering lists of election commitments handed over by the government. The Premier's Department does this routinely after every election. After a change of government, there's obviously a bigger process, but that's routine.
I think it's clear, Minister, that, and maybe you'd like to do this, is that you should amend 3.2 of eligible projects on the grant guidelines from have been nominated as an election commitment prior to the March 2023 list, and instead that point of the guidelines should be that you'll fund all projects as per the source of truth document, whether they're election commitments or not. Because
Well, look,
you're going off a document that's faulty.
But look, if the public service had concerns about something not being right, they're always welcome to put it up and say, look, as they have in other instances, here are the guidelines. This doesn't quite meet the guidelines for one reason or another. If it's a sensible thing to fund, and recommend an exemption. That hasn't happened in this instance.
The guidelines are good, Minister, but the public servants are relying on the information given to them by your political party and operatives in your party. That's the problem here, isn't it?
Well, no, I don't. There is a process with election commitments every election. I see this as consistent with that process.
Minister, have you ever communicated with anyone about this particular program on Signal or other messaging apps?
I would have to take that on notice. I think you've asked at estimates a range of questions about messaging apps and.
Do you use Signal, WhatsApp? What do you use?
I do use messaging apps. I'd have to take on notice the precise messaging apps. I find it slightly overwhelming, the number of them in the...
Right. So you're
He's
not
a
quite
Snapchat
sure.
guy.
TikToker.
I'd have to take that on
message
notice.
with Cherie Burton
can't.
on Signal or WhatsApp or any of those other messaging apps? Could you let me know?
Look, I won't be detailing, as is often the case I'm not going to be detailing all the discussions I've had with my colleagues.
I think, Minister, it's quite clear that if we're to find out what the election commitments are, we would need to painstakingly ask all 93 Labor candidates at the last election to appear before us and outline to us what projects they promised in the lead up to the March 23 election.
Well,
that would be a fair assessment, wouldn't it?
Just need the 7 field officers. There's only 7.
Yeah, I
Or
mean,
the
you've
7
gone...
field officers
You've gone
at the very least.
Yeah,
Two of them
I
working.
don't accept where you're heading.
Will you commit to, you said that you will look into electorates or projects when they've been raised by the opposition or by the crossbench in the Parliament. Will you commit to looking into the discrepancies between the source of truth list and the original list for Wallandilly, Orange, Charlestown, Canterbury and Heffron and report back to us those discrepancies on notice?
Yeah, as I've said, if I've had concerns, I've sought briefings. I was satisfied with the explanation I got. Obviously, once again, you've raised a number of issues here. I'm happy to look at all those. Once again, you've made quite a significant number of errors of facts, so I wouldn't be surprised if some of the things you put today are wrong, but I'm certainly happy to continue the approach that I've tried to take, which is to look at the issues you've raised in good faith.
Mr. Latham.
Thanks, Chair. Minister, how can you explain that if you don't know and you haven't seen the 14th of June document, that in the one seat where you corrected the so-called errors, the seat of Sydney, the allocations have gone back exactly to what the 14 June document said, the so-called original list that Alison Morgan had on that date?
Well, look, Mr. Latham, I can understand why you're asking the question. I don't think it's reasonable for me to have an opinion without reviewing the document, and
But he knows
But can you explain how in correcting the Sydney errors it went back to the original list?
No,
what was the
I'm-
process by which you got it back
you've-
to the original
yeah.
election commitments as certified
Yep,
by
I
Lucy
think that's
Margette?
fair. Yeah, look, I raised the concern. My office then, I didn't receive that Tranche 7 brief. You had, that came up with the errors in it. I had said to my office, look, can we just check that the Sydney
You said to
electorates...
Damien O'Connor.
The Sydney electorates are correct. When I got a brief, I was assured that, or I was comfortable that this was in line, and therefore I was able to sign it off. But it was really that discussion that.
Did Damien O'Connor tell you how he reverted back to the original
Look,
list?
I was really...
Where those change numbers come from?
No. So
No?
I was really relying on the paperwork, but I'd asked for that to be checked, and once I was confident that, okay, look, we have checked this, then I was able to sign it off.
Right, so it's your evidence. Today's the first you've heard of this 14 June document, the original list.
Yeah, well, I haven't had the benefit of reviewing it, so I'd...
When did you first find out about it?
Well, really, as it was raised in the hearing.
As it
So,
was
but
raised in the hearing.
I haven't looked through the document that you've handed
And
out.
did you know Lucy Margette was responsible for
No.
the original list and what seemed to be the accurate bona fide Sydney allocations?
No.
You never spoke to her? She works in Emily Saval's office?
No.
Okay. And Minister, just looking back on this very unusual scheme, no one had ever heard of allocations equal across every one of 93 electorates.
I can understand why you thought it was unusual given the approach previously.
No, I don't want to be unkind. Some people have said it just looks like a straight bribe, and that's obviously one assessment of it. But looking back in the administration of it, what would you do different now, given all the problems that have arisen? And I'd put to you constructively that perhaps one of the problems was that you had three centres of power. You had the program office in the Premier's department, you had yourself as the integrity minister, so-called, giving oversight to it, and you had Cherie Burton in the Premier's office, a political person, obviously having a good time buttering up the crossbench with these changes. So those three centres of power haven't worked, have they? You would have been better off just with one or two.
Look, I think I take that suggestion in the spirit it's intended, which is, we're open to good advice about how to structure any of these grants programs, and we've tried to take some of that on along the way with this one. In particular, the Audit Office has had a good look at the program. I accept the characterisation that Alison Morgan's just made about the Audit Office report. It was, it really ran through and gave some good guidance, made a couple of recommendations. The government accepts those. We're always open to improving any programs that the government's
But
running.
in hindsight, what improvements would you make? Would you just bring it all under your direct administration as one centre of authority?
Look, I think we clearly accept the auditor's recommendations. They will be adopted. In relation to that suggestion, look, I take it as good advice. I'd need to think about future program design some more before
The next
responding.
election. Okay.
Before responding.
And you said earlier on that on the 21st of August, the briefing you had from the program office was similar to what we heard here earlier today from Ms Morgan. Well, I've got to say, if I'd heard that information and I'd been the responsible minister, probably the first thing I would have done after the briefing was pick up the phone and ask Cherie Burton, why did these lists change so often? Why were there 5 different iterations of it? Can you explain that to me? Did you do that?
Look, I think the way it was put to me was there was a first batch, there was a second batch. They were contacting the organisations to get the details and cataloguing the commitments. So that was there was not a discussion about a list on the 14th of June. But, I asked a range of questions about it and found it reasonably persuasive as I was being briefed on it.
But were you told what we heard today, that there's 5 different iterations of...
There were a number of different iterations as the contact details were being collected
Wouldn't you check
as
with Cherie
people
why
were...
that happened? Wouldn't you check with her directly? Why? How can you make 5 changes?
Well, I
To
think...
election commitments that were solid in rock.
No.
Inscribed-
As I understood it, and
Inscribed in rock on election night.
as I understood it, this was more about the contact details and the nature of the organisation and collecting those details.
Well, how can that be true, say, in Wallandilly, where Lucy Margette testified and wrote down that there's just $400,000 for playgrounds and parks? 3 months later, or 4 months later, how do you get a whole list of new organisations? Unless you got it from Judy Hannon.
Yeah, look, I don't know the details of that specific.
Can you check?
Yeah, well, I'm happy to check.
Thank you.
Minister, when we were talking before, and you've said a few times now about, this is just the way that we deal with election commitments, there's nothing sort of unusual here. If it's so common and usual for election commitments to be dealt with like this, then why did you have to invent this entirely new process for this one? I mean, this was not a standard election commitment, was it? Because we had to have an entire office set up to administer it.
Oh, no, no, an entire new office was not set up to administer it. There is a grants office that deals with a number of grants programs, and that's why they've got that.
How many extra people did you have to hire to look into this program? How many hours of work went into producing new guidelines? And my understanding is you're still working through these allocations. They're still not, that work's not been done.
Yeah, look, I don't know the answer to that. It's really a question for the public service in terms of extra people or resources.
And is it true that the community building partnerships program has been delayed because of the work that's been done on this particular program?
Look, I think in order to try and comply with the calls for papers for the House, that has certainly delayed some of these programs. Absolutely. And that's true in this grants area as well.
So
and
it's a call for papers, you think, that is the
it is
cause?
absolutely one of the factors here. And I've been clear. I expect I've been clear in the House. I expect this material to be produced. I can understand why people are want to ask questions about it, but of course that has an impact.
How many tranches of this program are we up to now?
Of which program?
Of the of this one, this election, this. I keep calling the pre-election Labor candidate slush fund. This one that we're talking about, thank you, the LSCA. I understand there was a number of tranches because Sydney was in tranche 7, and
I see.
a bunch of tranches.
There's more than 600 projects. The tranches more refer to the bundles of paperwork that come up.
Okay,
altogether.
What are we up to?
Well, there's more than 640 projects, I understand.
And how many tranches of documents?
I couldn't answer that. I mean, I can take that on notice for you. But the tranches are more about the just the waves of paperwork.
Right. So nothing to do with the SO52 though. Like that paperwork just exists.
Yeah.
We've
No.
had
Exactly.
several tranches of SO52.
Yes,
as well.
we have had several tranches.
Right,
Sorry, I'm
okay.
just trying to drill
Yeah.
into this idea that somehow it's the SO52 that is taking up all of this this labour, rather than the fact that, as we've seen, you've had to go and find out people's details, and we've heard from lots of people saying that they didn't know they were getting money because they were never told, before the election, all sorts of things. So you're saying that it's the call for papers that this particular office is complying with that's delaying it, and not the program itself.
Sorry, that's delaying what? The
doling out of the money, the actual giving of the money.
Oh, for the community building partnerships.
Well, for both programs.
program.
It's taking a very long time.
Yeah, look, I'm sure there's a range of factors. I would identify that as one of the factors.
Okay, so bringing us back then, you've got an entire process, guidelines, people.
But I do want to stress, I think it's very important. Like, I accept that the material should be provided, and we've asked for that to be prioritised.
Okay, but the question that I have for you is basically trying to drill down into this kind of very strange idea that somehow this is just like every other election commitment. As I said before, the program itself might be an election commitment, but this allocation of money to individuals who were promised something by a Labor candidate prior to the election is quite novel. If it's just so standard, why do we need to have all of these additional guidelines and programs around it? You accept that it's not standard?
I accept that it's not standard. This is not the same as every other commitment, because the attempt here was to create a grants program that was equal in all aspects, which had taken out many of the flaws of previous coalition programs.
No, the unusual bit here is that it was promised prior to an election by candidates who were only Labor candidates.
I don't see making election commitments as an unusual part of the political process.
I don't see the party making the election commitment as an unusual part of the process, but we're talking about a Labor election slush fund, where candidates were able to run around as part of their campaign funding. They were going around having meetings where they were talking about how to best allocate this money in order to maximise their votes. That's quite an unusual program, isn't it, Minister?
Well, I don't accept your characterisation of the
Okay,
program.
well,
The point I was trying to make, though, which is relevant to where you're heading, was the process of transmitting election commitments is the bit that I see as the same. So that's the distinction.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree, a different program, but the process of collecting election commitments and transmitting them is routine,
Which
but quite
not-
complicated in
But not
government.
routine when you have to have an entire process, new guidelines, everything else set up. That's not routine. That's not just passing it on to the public sector, is it?
That relates to the nature of the guidelines for the program, to try and make it equal everywhere.
No,
It
no,
doesn't relate to
no.
the process of transmitting election commitments.
Dearie
Chair.
me. Go ahead.
Minister, just following on from that previous characterisation about how this was a new program and things had to be set up, and given everything that's been made of this program and the administration of it, just want you to walk us through the lengths that were gone to make sure that this program was a lot more equitable and had a lot more integrity vis-a-vis previous programs, and how you think as a minister that's been transmitted in practice?
Yeah, look, I think we've canvassed a range of these, but it probably is worth just touching on them again. Rather than allocate 96% of any of these funds to just one political party, it's gone to $400,000 to each electorate. If there were residual funds, it's been allocated to quite a good public purpose, parks and playgrounds. That's been done in a strict per capita way. It didn't matter who won the seat, this was still delivered. We had seen examples of schemes before where candidates were going around saying, if I'm not elected, don't think you're getting this project. This is the opposite of that. The grants guidelines have been approved. There's a range of these election commitments have been made. I've knocked them back because I wasn't satisfied that they did meet the guidelines. A range of others where it was sensible. This was a good use of public funds, but it didn't meet the guidelines. There's been exemptions where that's been recommended. So these are entitled to be dealt with under a range of ways, but just to be clear, 6 projects have been refused. They were election commitments, but I couldn't satisfy myself. The program office couldn't satisfy itself that for one reason or another it was a good use of public funds. Those are all things that distinguish this program from some of the programs previously. That's not to say there couldn't be improvements, and there will be, any of the suggestions that are made, we're happy to take seriously.
And Minister, just on this piece about the local MPs, regardless of which political party they were from, be it opposition or government, were consulted on that residual amount that went to parks and playgrounds. Can you remember that happening before?
No, I can't recall that. But it was, that was one of the questions that was raised. Look, I've just been elected. How do I have some say? Look, I thought that was a good suggestion, and we made sure that for that residual amount for parks and playgrounds, it didn't matter who had just been elected, they had a say in that.
Yeah. I just want to walk you through this other little sort of microcosm example that gets raised fairly consistently in this hearing, ad nauseum actually. This Sydney business where they were meant to have got over $400,000, the implication being that it was because it was Sydney, it was Greenwich, let's buy them off. That's the implication. In fact, what happened was that the Premier's discretionary fund got used, which is a separate discretionary fund. There's nothing sort of particularly novel about that. You've got the LSCA and then you've got the Premier's discretionary fund. And in fact, the exact same thing happened in the opposition leader's electorate of Cronulla, didn't it?
Well, it is. Yeah, look, I probably don't want to comment in great detail on, but look, I do think if it's very difficult to attack one MP for getting money from the Premier's discretionary fund and say that's over 400,000, and then exempt the fact that another MP's done the same, and that's not a problem.
Peter?
Nice answer.
Okay, back to the opposition.
Minister, why are you refusing to give any details of conversations that you've had with Cherie Burden about the LSCA program?
Look, I haven't had a great deal of discussions about this program in general. By the way, I've largely worked off the paperwork, and I've so I think that's and I've found the paperwork to be of very high standard. That's really been to avoid having my view influenced by others. So I've worked through diligently with that approach.
Right. So how many conversations have you had with Ms. Burden about?
I'm not going to detail the discussions I've had with all my colleagues. That's not unusual for witnesses and ministers at these hearings.
How many programs do you administer as Special Minister of State? Is this the only grant one?
That is no. Oh, look, it's certainly not the only grant program I administer. Although I wouldn't want to. Often the decision maker is not the minister. On some occasions it is. So I wouldn't want to mislead you about the number for which I'm the formal decision maker.
Not as I'm specifically Special Minister of State. Not as I know you've got
see.
transport,
Right.
arts, and others.
Okay.
This sits under you as Special Minister of State.
Yeah.
Correct? Is this the only one that you do in that role?
I think that will be true. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you just said you haven't had a lot of conversations about it, even though it's the only one that you do in that ministerial capacity. And I think we've asked about 50 questions on it in the House, and there's an entire inquiry set up as we're here now to look into this program. Yet you haven't talked to many people about it.
Look, I've certainly spent time examining the claims of the opposition and investigating them, if that's your concern.
So, Minister, essentially you're relying on the briefs, the advice that you receive from the program office. The program office is relying on the list of election commitments that they receive from Cherie Burden, Paul Mills and the Premier's office. So the buck really stops with the Premier and the Premier's office, doesn't it?
No, look, I accept. I'm the decision maker for the program. Everyone's played their own role here. The public service has got a different role to play to the executive government. Different ministers or different officers have got a different role to play. That's not unusual. You have had access to all the paperwork to do with this program, all the communications about it. That has been happily released by the government. I've encouraged that on behalf of the public service. You've gone through that in great detail. You've made a range of assertions which usually have often been in error, but have not really turned up anything compared to the incredible programs we saw under the coalition government. So
Minister,
I don't
why
accept
is
your
this the only one
characterisation.
you administer as Special Minister of State?
I can't. I mean, the Special Minister of State role doesn't administer a lot of grants programs.
So, but why have you been given this one then?
Well,
what was the rationale for that?
I mean, that's
A hospital pass.
That's not really a. I mean, those allocations are made by the incoming government.
So the Premier decided that it would fall with you?
No,
is
look,
that, Well, who did? Who decided this one comes to John as Special Minister
any
of
of the.
State?
I mean, it's not my decision about
Yeah, I
what
accept
exact
that,
precisely
but
what
whose decision
responsibility.
was it?
Well, those are decisions normally made by the Premier.
And was it in this case a decision
Well, I'm
made by
not
the Premier?
detailing discussions.
I mean, it was. Just say yes. Like he's given it to you to do. That's pretty standard.
Yeah, well,
That's
look,
what's happened.
Yeah,
Okay. Thank you.
I'm
You've given me my answer.
I'm administering this program for the team. Yes.
And Minister, why didn't we receive the 14th of June list in the original call for papers? We could have had this list back in January. We only received it a month or two ago.
Yeah, look, I think I encourage you to. You have asked the public service about that. I'd encourage you to pursue that with them.
Yeah, well, we were as the responsible minister, I mean, we did call for all papers regarding the
it's one of
LSCA
the-
program.
yeah.
We gave a very generous, as the chair would remember, time frame to provide those documents. I think it was something like a 2-month time frame to provide, maybe even longer. all the LSCA documents. We then did a follow-up call for papers, and then another one after that, and it's taken us some time. You know, we get questions or criticism from the government members at why do we need to keep calling the same witnesses over and over again, partly because we're not getting answers to our questions, but also partly because documents aren't being provided to the House when they're supposed to be. If we'd received all these documents in January, this inquiry probably could have been a lot shorter.
Mr. Rath, I don't accept you're not getting answers. I've tried to answer questions.
But we weren't getting the documents
answered questions.
when we were supposed
On the
to.
question about the documents, look, I'm actually pretty sympathetic to where you're heading. It's one of the reasons why I've been clear in the House when I've been asked. I've been clear about my expectations to the public service up front. It's also why I've been clear I want these documents released early, released publicly. You asked me about Tranche 7, for example. I hadn't received it, but it also hadn't been made public, and we made sure it was public as soon as it was brought to my attention. If you've got other concerns on that front, look, I think you're entitled to ask about it, and you can be assured the government will act.
Mr. Latham, do you have anything?
Minister, on the 20th of October 2023, you directed the Program Office to conduct a conflict of interest review for 15 electorates because you'd been advised there may be a conflict of interest question. Most of those were councillors. But who advised you of the conflict of interest question or problem in the seat of Camden?
Look, my recollection is I thought it was 17 electorates that end up having that, recalling that the advice to me from the public service was, look, the guidelines are quite strict, this isn't required. The opposition had raised concerns, and I felt that this would add to the program, so I insisted that wherever there had been issues raised that this occur. One of those electorates was Camden. I can't recall the way in which that originally came up, but it would have been either a councillor or someone had identified this publicly.
Can you take that on notice as to who
Yeah.
identified it? And was it because of material on the Labor Party website for the election campaign revealing that Mrs. Quinnell ran a music business in Camden and was now allocating $75,000 to the Camden Musical Society, which he'd helped establish?
Why don't I take that on notice, and I'm happy to report back, but I couldn't tell you off the top of my head.
And
Excuse
who
me, Chair. Sorry. Excuse me, Chair. I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. Latham and Minister. In terms of timing, I had thought we were at an hour for each witness. I'm just in terms of planning.
Have we got the timing wrong? Yeah, all right, sorry, apologies. We have just, yes, thank you, Dr. Kane. I didn't realise.
Sorry, I thought I was due to leave at 5:15.
Yes, apologies for keeping you. That is just, we were engrossed in your answers. Thank you very much. That does conclude our time with you. To the extent there were questions taken on notice or supplementary questions, the Committee Secretariat will be in touch, but that does conclude our time with you. Thank you very much.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you.
Thank you,